You
Well,
ready to go? Good morning, everyone.
Thank you, Rita, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Board Development Committee meeting of the West End Opportunity Partnership. I'll call the meeting to order. It's 8:31 on August 15th, and thanks to everyone for being here. It's been a long time since we've met, and I want to welcome our newest committee member, Michael Brown, who has joined this committee. So thank you, Michael, for stepping forward to join us on this committee. And thanks to you, Amy, for joining us today as well. We'll hope that Chris and Alicia can join us. We have some important topics to cover this morning. Hopefully you've had an opportunity to review the materials in advance. And I'm going to pull mine up right now. I had them on a different screen, so give me a moment. All right. So in your materials, there were the last meeting minutes from our last meeting. It's shocking to me that so much time has passed since the last time we met. But we have the meeting minutes from our last meeting, which was January the 18th of this year. So I'll give members of the committee an opportunity to review those if you haven't already. And Chris, I want to welcome you this morning. Welcome to the committee.
Wait a minute.
Are you all right?
I'm trying to get, okay, yes, hey, how's everybody
Good morning.
doing?
Good morning.
Morning.
We're just welcoming everyone, getting settled and taking a look at our last meeting minutes from our January 18 meeting. And then when someone's ready, we'll take a motion to approve those minutes as presented this morning.
This is Gina. I move that we adopt the minutes from January.
Thank you, Gina. Do we have a second?
Who was on the committee in January? I'm hesitant to make motions because I wasn't on.
Understood. Yeah. Chris, if you could make a second on that motion, if you've had a chance to review the minutes.
Sorry, had technical issues there. I second.
Thank you. All in favor of approving the minutes as presented this morning, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, thank you.
I abstain, okay.
Thank you. We will capture that in our notes. Okay. So next up on the agenda this morning, I want to spend some time talking about the work of this committee. And just as a quick review, particularly since Michael's new to the committee, I want to talk a little bit about what we've done historically and what I think the committee can be responsible for moving forward as our board continues to become more developed and stable, if you will. When this committee was first established, we were largely focused on a process of selecting as nominees to the board the 9 neighborhood members. And we've now accomplished that, and we worked really hard last year to accomplish that. As we look ahead to the future, we have other duties that this committee can be responsible for, and that includes a process whereby this committee vets and selects nominees from the other institutional seats that are legislated as part of this board. And so I want to spend some time talking about that this morning and getting your input. I've come today prepared with some of my own thinking around how we might develop a process that could ensure our board continues to be as diverse and as well-rounded as possible. In your packet of materials, you'll see that we have some board members whose terms expired at the end of June. And in the absence of this committee's action, those terms did expire. And so what I'm prepared to do today is to propose a way forward with those particular members and on an ongoing basis, how we might approach the selection when terms are expiring like that. So not just for the current state, but for the future state. So the board members whose terms expired include Gina, representing the NAACP, William Summers from Republic Bank, the governor's representative. As we know, that seat has switched as Ms. Weathers went to the Commonwealth's office. She's now being replaced by Kevin Jackson, and we'll get to that in a moment. But that seat also expired. And then Dr. Wade, representing the mayor's office, her seat expired at the end of June. We also have 2 open seats that have yet to be filled. One, the Federal Reserve Bank, and another representing a foundation, just as a quick reminder. And Alicia, welcome this morning. Good morning. We've just approved the minutes and we're just getting into the discussion of the committee's actions and functions moving forward.
Good morning.
Good morning. So we have those 2 open seats, okay? So we have essentially 6 seats, but really 5, given that the governor's office has acknowledged that they would like to see Kevin Jackson replace Ms. Weathers as the governor's representative. So I want to spend a little bit of time now talking about a proposed process for this committee, and let you know that given that we have more of an established board today, when we consider our history over the past 2 years, and it's taken us a minute to get our neighborhood members seated, we've had some turnover on the institutional board member seats. There's been very few of us, I think just maybe 3 or 4 of us, that have been consistent from the very beginning. And so when I think about needing to create stability on the board, as well as ensure that we have the most well-rounded board with the right skills, the right attributes, pulling in the same direction towards the goal, I would like you to consider that we begin a new process whereby we ask each of the institutions to submit to us a minimum of 2 nominees, if not 3, so that this committee has more autonomy and flexibility and authority regarding who is nominated to the board. In other words, rather than allowing the institutions to tell us who the board members will essentially be by only giving us 1 nominee, I would like to see a more empowered model whereby we have neighborhood members on this board, or on this committee rather, which is great, and give them a voice as well as the rest of us to ensure that this board is really responsible for selecting its members. And so my recommendation this morning that I want to put on the floor and get your input and have some discussion around is the idea that we go back to the institutions as those terms expire, and actually moving forward, we'll do this in advance, right? So we're operating a little bit more reactively than I think we would all like, symptomatic of a board that's still relatively in its infancy and evolving. But as we develop this kind of process, we'll be able to be more proactive, reaching out to those institutions and asking them before terms expire to give us a minimum of 2, if not 3 nominees for the consideration of this committee. And that will enable us to vet those members based, or those nominees rather, based on what we're seeking for members of the board. So let me stop there and open it up and get your reaction.
Well, I am one who was here from the super beginning, actually, even before the legislation was signed. And I've said publicly that I think that the General Assembly kind of got things backwards, because we started out with a group, I think it was 12 or 13, with no neighborhood representatives. And then those 12 or 13 were supposed to go out and select the neighborhood representatives. And I've always felt that it should be the neighborhood representatives running the organization rather than those who came from any particular assignment or appointment. And that's why I was very glad that Dr. Milner stepped up to, to come forward. The statute is what the statute is, and as I read it, Actually, I'm gonna have to ask Amy, somebody, to help with this a little bit, because it talks in terms of um, self-perpetuation, but it also says that the overall makeup of the board shall remain the same. So and operationally, it begs, do these organizations get to select, or is it, again, going back to what I think the intent of the statute was to have the board, using the term self-perpetuate, be the ones to make these decisions. You run into a couple of kind of gray areas, because I don't know that the board is going to tell the governor or the mayor who to appoint to the board. And, the way the statute reads, I'm in favor of, we got an instance going on now with the airport board at the city level, and I'm super familiar with that. I was there for 12 years, chaired it for 6, but apparently the city council has the issue with a board member that was proposed by the mayor on that board. So I would like definitely to see more control in the hands for everything we talk about: trust, transparency, that this is not just a closed circle, inner circle group of people who wink and pick whoever they want from those who happen to be in a position of whatever you want to call it, power, influence. I just want to be sure that when we look at the statute, and this I guess goes to Amy, and look at, we juxtapose that language of self-perpetuation by the board versus the positions of the elected officials or the organizations in this, that we're headed down the right track. I'm in favor of, let's throw it out and have the board make its own decision on membership, as long as it's in keeping with what the statute is. I know that's a long answer, but I read this thing last night again, and I'm not 100% sure which way it goes. Amy?
Yeah, thankfully, I've had a little chance to think about this, because Laura let me know that this was under consideration and wanted to know what my views were on the interaction of subsection 1 and then subsection 4 of KRS 65503, which is the statute that lays out all of these categories of membership and the different groups. And if you look at subsection 1, there's a difference between parts A through E, where you have the governor, the mayor, the Metro Council, U of L, and Simmons College having the power to appoint their own person, and then the remaining groups under subsection F, where they were initially appointed by the governor, but they had to be essentially members of these organizations or from those organizations. So harmonizing that with subsection 4, where the board shall self-perpetuate and the overall makeup of the board should stay the same. I'd say the board would then step in and I hate to use, Secretary Brown will probably cringe when I use this term, but as the appointing authority. Whereas, our governor's appointment, the mayor, those would still, I think, need to be in the hands of the governor, the mayor, Metro Council, U of L, and Simmons, but then NAACP, One West, Louisville Urban League, then I think those then become appointed by the board, and the board can set its own procedure. And if the board wants to ask for nominees and have them vetted by the committee, I think that's totally appropriate under the statute. And that's just discretionary with the board and its decision under subpart 4 about how to self-perpetuate. Hopefully that wasn't too much lawyer gobbledygook there.
Amy, I'm sorry. I'm struggling to follow, I guess, the distinction that you were making between, I guess, the governor's initial appointments that includes many of the institutions that are named, and then I guess the other set. I guess, that you're distinguishing between the governor's appointments versus the group appointed by the mayor, the Metro Council, the U of L president, and Simmons president?
Right. Yeah, you have one group and it's the first 5 listed in the statute that I would say they're self-executing. If the governor appoints a member, they're a member. When the mayor appoints a member, they're a member. Yeah, the same with Metro Council, U of L, and Simmons College. But then when you get to the rest of the seats that are for, I'll call them like community foundations, community groups, they're not self-executing. Say when One West picks a representative, they're not automatically on the board. They had to be approved by the governor. Theoretically, the governor could have said, I don't like who you sent me a different name. I don't think that happened or anything, but there is, the governor was the decision maker for that first go around. And I think under Section 4, then essentially the board can step into that role because the governor only had that discretion for the first appointment. And then the board has the responsibility after that. So I think that then members from those groups are not automatically on once they're nominated by One West, the NAACP. It's going to take then the board's approval to put them on, and the board can decide on the process, how they want to do that. Whether it's take nominees, whether it's we're going to automatically accept. I think that's the board's discretion at that point, but the board has that power to make those decisions.
Can you remind us, I guess, which board seats or representatives would fall under the category of, non-self-executing, or I don't know what to call it.
Right. Yeah, that's the best term I can come up with. It's NAACP, One West, Urban League, Federal Reserve Bank, Volunteers of America, the locally based foundation with assets over 100 million, and a bank with local assets greater than $1 billion. So it would be that collection of board seats that requires, someone else's blessing. They're not just automatically on the way the statute's constructed.
So would, I believe, Mr. Jackson fall in that category as well?
Is he the governor's appointment?
Yes, he is.
So I
Keith
think
L. Jackson.
I think that seat is, once we get a name from the governor, that's the name under 1A.
Yes.
So the process I'm proposing this morning, Amy, to your good clarification, and thank you, Michael, for the question, and Amy for the answer. This is really helpful for all of us. I think it certainly is for me. It sounds like of the seats that have expired, it's really relevant to 2, the Republic Bank and the NAACP seats at this point in time. Now, for those of us who will come up for expiration in the future, representing those other institutions, whatever process we come up with will apply.
That's what I would suggest is the fairest reading of the statute, to harmonize those sections.
Thank you.
How do we deal with the Federal Reserve Bank? As I remember, they've indicated that they felt it was a conflict for them to serve on this type of board. So the statute goes into something that if someone is unable or unwilling, which I would say that is, then it falls back to the, I know the General Assembly didn't clean it up, but it still begs the question.
Well, they added that new sub 3 in the last session that allows the board to substitute an appointed member by majority vote to serve for the remainder of the term. So I think this procedure could then apply to any of these groups who refuse to send a nominee, or even under the self-executing one. I mean, this is just a for instance. I don't think it would ever happen. Let's say U of L, which is one of what I've called the self-executing seats, refuses to send a name. I think then the board under subpart 3 could fill that seat and use whatever procedure they want. If it's ask for nominations from another group, pick a name, but it would just need a majority vote of the board.
One way that we might consider, and I want to propose this today and ultimately get your input and take a vote to this. So I'm going to, since we're moving forward in the agenda to this point, and then we'll backtrack and consider 2 votes today. One for what we've discussed to date, which is a new process whereby we solicit and receive nominations from those specific institutions that we've discussed. But secondarily, as it relates to the Federal Reserve Bank, given their reluctance to participate on this board, now that we have the ability to move forward and make a different type of selection, I want to ask for your consideration that we do just that and start identifying nominees that can represent the banking industry, so that the seat is filled with that type of expertise, but not by that particular institution. Likewise, the foundation seat has been vacant since David Kaplan joined the administration. And to date, we have not identified a foundation that fits the statute's requirements in terms of scope and size that is willing to participate. Now, with that said, we haven't exhausted the list. And Laura and I have discussed in her role and in mine, going through that full list of eligible foundations and inquiring with them before we come back to this committee and suggest that we go an alternate path with that particular seat. So we're not there on the foundation yet. We need to do some additional due diligence, but I think with the Federal Reserve Bank seat, it's clear that that will not be filled by that institution. And therefore, we now have an opportunity to take responsibility for identifying a nominee that would be suitable for that seat.
Jennifer, are you asking for a motion on the Federal Reserve matter right now?
I would be happy to take a motion on that. And then we can open it up for additional discussion if we would like.
The motion would be that we fill the Federal Reserve seat with an entity from the banking community.
This is Chris. I'll make the motion that we fill the Federal Reserve seat with someone from the banking community.
Thank you, Chris. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Michael. Further discussion.
And I might have missed it, and Amy, you might have already said it. What's the criteria again for that, filling that position or filling that seat?
The original criteria was just Federal Reserve Bank with nothing more. So under sub 3, you're supposed to identify an entity that is located in or has a history of service to the West End Opportunity Partnership area from which a potential substitute appointee can be selected. And to try, and then under sub 4, you're supposed to continue to try to represent the categories as well. So I think that's where Jennifer is coming from in wanting to focus on banking, since the Federal Reserve Bank, has that role. There were essentially 2 banking seats. One was the Federal Reserve and the other was the bank with local assets greater than $1 billion. So this would preserve that kind of, not hierarchy, but the General Assembly's intent of having 2 banking related seats. I think the only caveat is it needs to be, when you eventually pick someone, it should be a bank that does service the West End Partnership area.
To your point, Amy, I would like to, add another perspective, thinking about community development finance institutions. which are generally organized to serve and provide financial services for underbanked communities or underserved communities. We have several CDFIs, as they're known, operating here in Louisville, including Elhome and Park Community Federal Credit Union is a community development banking institution. Liberty Bank has recently entered into the market. So I would, I guess, even to distinguish between conventional or traditional bankers, say like a Stockyards or a Republic Bank, that we give some thought and consideration to designating, requesting or seeking a representative from the community development banking industry because of their commitment and charter to serve underbanked communities.
And I think that, you know, if that's what you all chose to do, I think that would be wholly consistent with the statute.
And with the motion that's currently on the floor.
Good.
Pardon me?
Oh, Jen, I think she just said she thought that would also be consistent with the motion that's on the floor too.
Good feedback. Any other discussion? All right, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that motion passes. Thank you. Let's go back now to the original point of discussion regarding the institutional seats and a potential new process whereby we invite the institutions to submit two, if not more, names for our consideration. Are we prepared to have a motion that supports that direction?
Jennifer, I have a question. In what we're describing today, are we looking to incorporate this into our bylaws?
Ultimately, I think what we're doing today is creating new process that should be incorporated into our bylaws. Yes, so we've not had this type of structure or process before. In fact, as I previously said, this committee has really not been responsible for oversight of the institutional seats. So I think what we're doing today is really evolving this committee to have more robust influence over the makeup of this board, and it should be reflected in our bylaws.
So I guess my caveat would be that what's been brought before us today is somewhat complex. You did a great job sort of bringing us back to the statute and the history and the current state of affairs. But I would really like to see what is being proposed in written form, especially if we're going to take a vote on it today. I guess, is this something that we would take as a or you would take as a recommendation to the full board at our next meeting?
That's right, Gina. That's absolutely right. This would come as a recommendation out of this committee to the full board at the August meeting.
Yeah, so I would really appreciate, I guess, being able to see the actual language that's proposed that is consistent with the verbal explanations we've been given, particularly from our council before this committee takes action on it.
Let me suggest that through the miracles of screen sharing, that I know Rita can assist us in doing that and capture the language, put it up on the screen so that everyone can see it and see what they're voting on. Rita, can you assist us in that way if we dictate a motion to you? If the maker of the motion would dictate it to you?
Absolutely. I can bring up a blank document and draft as you all are discussing it. So that,
Okay.
that the written information can be visually seen. let me get myself together while you guys work on that.
Okay.
Rita, while she's doing that, is someone willing to formulate that motion?
Well, I guess I have a question. This kind of gets the chicken and the egg. I mean, would it be equally as important to go ahead and draft the change to the bylaws, adopt the bylaws, and then you have the process to move forward to get the new board members on?
Well,
Otherwise,
let me
we're going
just,
to make. Go ahead, Laura.
let me make a suggestion. In order to appropriately draft the bylaw change today, we would have to go back, reference that part of the bylaws where it would go in, decide what it would be numbered based on where it would be placed, et cetera. I think that's something that we can do after the fact rather than now trying to figure out exactly where it would be placed. As long as the motion stipulates that the bylaws will be amended to reflect this, then the board will have an opportunity to see a draft bylaw amendment and to be informed about where it will be placed.
Okay. Well, that would be good as long as our motion incorporates that and acknowledges that what we're recommending in this process is also a bylaw change. And then the
Yes.
technical bylaw change would just have to conform whatever the arrangement of the bylaws are.
Yeah, that can happen.
That makes sense. I'm trying to put the verbiage together based on our discussion this morning. So are we talking about the board development committee will request a minimum of 2, if not 3 nominees from the institutions reflected in the statute that are not self-perpetuating or self-nominating? Amy, help us with that language. How did you refer to that earlier?
I mean, I think it's not the most transparent because you'd have to have the statute in front of you, but the cleanest way to refer to it would be the institutions in KRS 65.503 subpart 1F.
Yes. That's the KRS reference.
Yeah.
Can you do the KRS again, Amy? I'm capturing it in the chat for Rita and helping
Sure.
her.
Oh, okay, all right. I didn't know this was is this the motion? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna tag team with you, Rita, and help you
Here, I
capture.
can put it
so
in the
everyone can
chat.
see it.
Yeah,
KRS what?
Amy,
Yeah, I'm putting, it's KRS 65.503. Then subpart 1F. With parentheses
what?
around the 1 and the
one
F.
in, one in paren.
Yeah, paren 1, then paren F.
S or F?
F as in Frank, but a lowercase.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay. So how do you all want this to, because I'm just kind of, I'm in another area here on Zoom, so Jennifer, I can't see your chat yet.
Okay.
I'll have to toggle back and forth.
I'm gonna put this in the chat for everyone to see.
Okay, that's good. And then I can copy it and put it on the screen. Let me go to chat.
Well,
Okay, let's see if I can get this over here.
Jennifer, while we're working on that, I'm wondering, has any of
It's
this,
not letting me paste.
has any of this, I guess, new protocol been socialized or vetted with any of the institutional partners?
No, Gina, we wanted to begin here for discussion today before we take this forward. We didn't want to put the cart before the horse, so to speak, if this weren't going to come out of committee. But certainly, you know, to your good question, we will definitely want to have good communication with those institutional members to let them know about the committee's action and subsequent board action should that happen, so that they understand the rationale and background for why this process is evolving as the board is evolving. So
So
we'll
just
definitely want to talk about that, what that communication looks like.
as a practical matter, for example, if it was, say, One West, for example, we would go to the CEO or the board of directors, and then they would be able to choose from amongst either their staff or their board members.
Yeah, I would see us going to the CEO and board chair and having a communication to those two individuals, and then have them responsible for identifying the nominees from staff and board.
So it's interesting, like say in your case, for example, at Volunteers of America, you were one of the people that we were communicating with along with your board chair to
Yes,
make the recommendation.
yes. While Rita's getting it on the screen, I invite everyone to check out the chat box where that language is reflected to see if that captures the proposed motion.
Jennifer,
Yes.
and this is just, maybe I'm missing something. And what is the reason for us adding or proposing this amendment to the bylaws?
Yes, thank you, Alicia. I think we covered this right before you got on the call. So this is in an effort to empower this board to have more decision-making authority regarding the makeup of our board. In other words, when we first got started, we were accepting the nominees as presented to us. And so this board, this committee, had no responsibility for selecting individuals on the basis of ensuring that our board is very well-rounded and diverse and has all of the characteristics and attributes and skill sets that are needed to do the work of this board. Well, now that we have our neighborhood representatives seated and we have just a few seats left to fill, it now makes sense to empower this committee so that each of us, particularly folks like you and Chris and other neighborhood members, have a direct role in identifying the individuals you want on the board representing the West End Opportunity Partnership. So by requiring these specific institutions to give us at least 2, if not more, nominees, then it gives us more decision-making authority to ensure that we're populating the board in a manner that is aligned with the work of the board at that point in time. This will continue to be iterative and evolve. And at each chapter of the life cycle, we'll need perhaps different skill sets and different attributes to push the work forward. And that this process will enable us to do just that, to have more flexibility and autonomy, rather than simply being rubber stamping the individuals that are presented to us because we only have one nominee to consider. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes sense.
Okay. Great question. I'm glad you asked it. Okay, it looks like we have the language up on the screen now. I want to see if we have a motion on the floor reflective of that language. And if someone's willing to make a motion to that extent.
Let me add just a little more language on it.
Okay,
To help clarify. The Board Development Committee will request a minimum of 2 nominees from institutions reflected in KRS 65503 subpart 1F for consideration of board membership as such seats become vacant.
good, Laura. Good clarity. Thank you.
Okay.
Would that be vacant and or expired?
And yes.
I guess like if somebody steps down, for example, before the end or conclusion of their term, that would be the vacated, but otherwise it's at expiration time, right?
But they are vacant at the end of their term. The seat is vacant after the term expires.
So the vacancy could be caused by a number of different reasons. Someone steps down, someone's term expires, resulting in the vacancy. Okay.
So, for example, are the people listed under the expired terms right now, all those seats are considered vacant?
Yes.
So, like say,
Because the
Well,
term
usually a seat,
expired.
once a term has expired, that the individual continues to serve until a replacement can be named. So
But here's
that happens. I don't know if that's in the statute, but that typically happens all over the place.
well, this is kind of interesting. Maybe it's a little sidebar discussion, and if we want to be real specific and clear, we can go back with that language. But the whole notion of the person being in the seat continuing, to my knowledge, there's a statute that applies to state boards that describes the fact that as the term expires, the person sitting in that seat continues until another person is named. But again, it's my understanding that that statute applies to state boards rather than regular nonprofit boards. That may be the practice for some boards, but there's nothing that compels that result of the person in the seat continuing.
Yeah,
So maybe we should.
yeah, your
go
bylaws
ahead.
your current bylaws are silent. So I will throw that out there. It doesn't address the issue at all. It does address that if there's a vacancy that the majority of the directors can fill it, but that's consistent with the statute. But it doesn't say what happens upon the expiration of an appointed term.
So maybe then it would be helpful if we say, as such seats become vacant, comma, or a term expires.
So this brings up an interesting, I guess, practical matter for me with regard to our upcoming board meeting. If, I guess, my role is considered vacant and I'm continuing, or am I continuing, or like say, would I be in a position to vote if I showed up? Like, do I count as part of the quorum? Or do any of the representatives currently considered expired, do we have a legitimate vote or make up the quorum in the meeting?
That's an Amy question.
And I'm trying to find the general statute and look at its wording. Because obviously that causes issues with quorum as well. And I'm having trouble finding that on the fly here. I mean, given that your bylaws are silent, I think that, and I would think of that as a bylaws issue. I think it's unless I find something to the contrary in the statutes on nonprofit corporations, and that's what I'm going next. I'm looking at directors and officers here right now. I would say that it's I'd say it's a board decision. But I may be able to find a default in the and the default corporate statute, since we do have a corporate form. So I'm looking at that right now.
Okay.
Glad we're having this discussion.
Another question regarding our language, particularly as a practical matter, is the use of the word request as opposed to require.
Okay.
So, for example, like say with the NAACP, they have no paid staff, so they would be trying to come up with multiple nominees from the general membership, basically, right? And if they decline to send more than one nominee, then what would be our response or position at that point?
I think we would vet that one individual and still have an empowered approach whereby this committee would take a vote to determine if we want to nominate that individual to the board.
And if we were to pass on the
individual, would we then make another request or communicate?
That's
back
right.
to-
Communicate back to the institution that that nominee did not receive the votes, and that we're seeking another nominee.
And the bylaw can be written to reflect, I mean, hopefully we're not gonna get in a situation where we need to, say after 3 attempts, they'll fill it otherwise or something, but we can craft, if that's the will of the board, craft some language that they will, if a nominee is rejected, that they'll go back and ask for more nominees as opposed to the board just filling it with someone else. To try to keep it within the general feeling, the general intent of the General Assembly of keeping those board seats. I will say I have found the general rule in the absence of a bylaw to the contrary is that despite the expiration of a director's term, he shall continue to serve until his successor is elected and qualified.
Great.
So unless we, adopt a bylaw to the contrary, that would be the default law.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you, Amy. With that, is someone ready to make a motion based on the language reflected on the screen?
I'll move it.
Michael moves the motion. Is there a second?
I'll second this, Chris.
Thank you, Chris. All in favor of accepting, and let's first see if there's any other discussion. All right, hearing none. All in favor of approving this motion today, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Is there any opposed?
Nay. I'm opposed,
Gina, I'm sorry, did you say you are opposed?
correct.
Okay, thank you. We'll reflect that in our minutes. Okay, that motion passes. Let's go back now and see from our agenda standpoint what other business we have to cover today. I guess I just want to circle back to the fact that we do have a new appointment to the board, Kevin Jackson. And Rita and Laura, this question is likely directed to one or both of you. Is Mr. Jackson prepared to join us at the August meeting? Will we be welcoming him to the board at that time?
That's the
That's the
plan.
Plan. We are in communication with the state.
I think it's
State.
Keith Jackson too.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay, thank you. Thank you, Michael. Okay,
Oh,
so.
I know him. Sorry, that's aside. I was like, I didn't know Kevin Jackson, but I know
Okay.
Kevin Jackson.
Now it's ringing the bell.
Yeah.
Okay.
I put the
so-
correction in the chat box. It's Keith L. Jackson.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Rita, and we'll make sure that's reflected appropriately at the August meeting when we welcome him. So now that we've conducted our business as a committee this morning, we'll move forward these two recommendations to the full board at the August meeting. One related to how we'd like to contemplate the Federal Reserve seat, and the other regarding a new proposed process for those institutions that we've described in the KRS that's listed in the motion. Is there any other business today before I seek a motion to adjourn? Hearing none, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Thank you. A second?
This is Chris. I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor of adjourning this meeting, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thanks for your time this morning, everyone. This was a very productive meeting, and I appreciate your time so much. I'll see you at the August meeting in just a few weeks.
Bye.
Good
Bye,
day,
everyone.
everyone.
Thanks, Amy.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you.